And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Monday, August 12th. And this outlook will be for Tuesday into Wednesday, but to set things up, we do have, as of this Monday later morning, there's a secondary, what we call shortwave, that's going to be working across the west arm here of the Alaska Range and south central, bringing some additional rain or rain showers here in the afternoon into the evening. That'll move eastward and tend to dissipate with time, but then the pattern is such we're going to see a ridge of high pressure build up along the Alaska Peninsula into the mainland as we go through Tuesday and Wednesday, and this is going to set up some fine weather across areas of the mainland for midweek, and that'll be shifting eastward into the Panhandle as we get into the late week. Meanwhile, there's going to be a pretty strong low pressure come out of the North Pacific across the western and central Aleutians on Wednesday, and eventually that feature will work across areas of the central Bering into along the west coast as we get toward the end of the week, bringing more widespread rain, gale force winds with some gusts to storm force possible. But before then, the ridge of high pressure that's going to be setting up here along the mainland will be quite a reprieve from what we've had. But this time of year, we've had a lot of rainfall. Ground is saturated in many areas, so you get fog. Any type of clearing overnight into the early morning, watch out for some areas of fog, which could delay morning departures for air travel. But along the west coast, extensive IFR conditions expected there, as well as along areas of the north central, northeastern, and outer coast here of the Panhandle here Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, that area of IFR over the Gulf and along the northeastern coast and Panhandle should lift enough to be MVFR. We have down here along the areas of the west coast, just east of the Yavik, some IFR, but then down through the Bering Strait and all along the lower Yukon, Kuskokwim deltas, we do expect there to be areas of fog extending out through the Bering. And then Wednesday morning, again, the interior seeing generally fair skies, but with the clearing, there could once again be areas of fog in a number of the valleys. And so keep that in mind, but it should burn off mid-late morning. And then looking at the Gulf, again, widespread MVFR conditions out over the Gulf and just along the western coast of the Panhandle, northeastern Gulf Coast. Extensive IFR, though, again, areas of the Chukchi Sea down through the Bering Strait. Along the southwest coast, YK deltas, Bristol Bay, and then all out along, especially central western Aleutians. And by Wednesday afternoon, we see an area of IFR conditions out over the western Gulf, and then again continuing along areas of the west and just off of the southwest coast, encompassing most of the Aleutian chain. Past conditions then for Tuesday, VFR is expected there in the middle portion, eastern portion of the Brooks Range, Adigan Pass, VFR as well. But again, some areas could see some fog in the early morning. Lake Clark and Merrill, generally VFR conditions expected through the passes there Tuesday. Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, eastward along the Alaska Range, Isabel and Mentasta should all see VFR conditions. But again, any of some of these little spots that are saturated soil could have some fog in the morning. Tanita Pass also VFR conditions, Portage Pass VFR, and then across the northern end of the Panhandle we expect MVFR conditions at Chilkoot and White. So we have freezing level, kind of also tells you a bit about the mid-upper level pattern, because where you have a dome of warmer air, it's typically either associated with a ridge of high pressure or with a front, ahead of a front. We have a cooler trough of low pressure sitting over the mainland where freezing levels are below 6,000 feet Tuesday morning, including much of the middle Yukon, middle upper Yukon, as well as the Tanana River Valley and along the Alaska Range. We do find freezing levels bumping upward above 12,000 feet once you get out toward the central Aleutians. But notice back here toward Russia, we find freezing levels aloft falling back down to below 2,000 feet along the Russian Arctic coast. There is a front up here in this region that is going to brush at least the northwestern quadrant of the mainland as we go through the day on Tuesday. So icing potential is associated with that front across the Chukchi Sea, Point Hope, up through Wainwright in that area. May encounter some moderate icing above 5,000 feet in the clouds and any precipitation there. There's the potential with some light precipitation for some moderate to icing along the Alcan border, Wrangell, St. Elias area above 6,000 feet, and then back to the west. The approaching low that's going to be crossing the western and central Aleutians on Wednesday. Ahead of that push of warmer air, we will have the potential for some moderate icing, but quite high up above 12 and 14,000 feet there through the central and the western Aleutians. Upper level jet stream patterns, some troughiness remains here out over southwest Yukon, and kind of headed toward the panhandle with winds aloft 70, 80 knots out of the west-northwest. Here's a trough that's going to be swinging through the northwest portion of the mainland, and ahead of it 80 to 90 knot winds. And then as we bring it down to 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, we can clearly see a broad belt of winds 35 to 45 knots. Northern Bering, Chukchi Sea, northwest portion of the mainland with some localized areas of 50 knots. And again, this is all associated with the front. We bring it down to 3,000 feet. It's a little better delineated for impacts to lower level flying, 35 to 40, even some 50 knot winds there are in the vicinity of Cape Lisburne, Point Hope. But along this area here is where we would expect the greatest turbulence, and these winds extend back toward the Aleutians. And as a result, we'd expect there to be turbulence there as well. So the greatest threat for moderate turbulence will be across areas of St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound, extending up to Point Hope and northeastward along the western areas of the Brooks Range, North Slope up to Utqiagvik, surface to 4,000 feet. You may encounter some moderate turbulence, and then an area of moderate turbulence out here toward the western Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet on Tuesday.